Asterisk, hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into one of the most heartbreaking yet incredible chapters of American history that most people have never heard about. Between 1854 and 1929, over 250,000 children were placed on trains and sent away from their homes to live with complete strangers across America. This was the Orphan Train Movement, and the stories of these children will absolutely break your heart, while also showing you the incredible resilience of the human spirit. So, let's get into this forgotten piece of American history. Asterisk, picture this. It's the mid-1800s in New York City. The Industrial Revolution is in full swing. Immigrants are flooding into America by the thousands, and the city is bursting at the seams. But with all this growth came a massive problem that nobody was prepared for: homeless children. Tens of thousands of them living on the streets. Asterisk, these weren't just runaways or troublemakers. Many were genuine orphans whose parents had died from disease, workplace accidents, or childbirth complications. But even more were what we'd call half-orphans today. They had one living parent, usually a widowed mother who simply couldn't afford to feed another mouth. In those days, there was no welfare system, no food stamps, no social safety net. If you couldn't work, you couldn't eat. And if you couldn't feed your children, you had to make an impossible choice. Asterisk, so these kids lived on the streets. They slept in alleyways, under bridges, in wooden crates, anywhere they could find shelter. They survived by selling newspapers, shining shoes, picking pockets, or rummaging through garbage for food. Some were as young as 5 or 6 years old, completely alone in one of the world's biggest and most dangerous cities. Asterisk, the numbers were staggering. By the 1850s, there were an estimated 30,000 homeless children living on the streets of New York City alone. The city's population at that time was only about 500,000 people, which means roughly 1 in every 17 people you'd see on the street was a homeless child. It was a crisis unlike anything America had seen before. Asterisk, now, it's not like people didn't care about these kids. There were orphanages and almshouses, which were basically poorhouses where destitute people could go. But these institutions were absolutely horrible. They were overcrowded, underfunded, and often run more like prisons than homes. Asterisk, children in these places were frequently abused, both physically and emotionally. They were given minimal food, barely any education, and were often put to work doing hard labor. Disease spread like wildfire in these cramped conditions. Many children who entered these institutions didn't live to see adulthood. Asterisk, the philosophy behind these places was also pretty harsh. There was this idea that poverty was a moral failing, that poor people were poor because they were lazy or sinful. So the institutions were deliberately made unpleasant to discourage people from using them. Can you imagine? Punishing children for being poor and homeless? Asterisk, some well-meaning people tried other approaches. There were street missions that would try to reform these children, teaching them religion and trying to get them off the streets. But these programs could only help a handful of kids at a time. The problem was just too massive. Asterisk, enter Charles Loring Brace, a young minister and social reformer who would change everything. In 1853, at just 27 years old, Brace founded the Children's Aid Society in New York City. Unlike other reformers of his time, Brace had a radical idea. Instead of warehousing these children in institutions, why not find them real families? Asterisk, but not just any families. Brace looked west, to the expanding frontier and the farming communities of the Midwest. Out there, families needed help on their farms and had space in their homes. Meanwhile, in New York, there were thousands of children desperate for homes. Brace thought, why not connect them? Asterisk, this wasn't entirely altruistic. Brace had some problematic views that were common for his time. He worried that these street Arabs, as homeless children were called, would grow up to be criminals and drag down society. He saw placing them with rural, Protestant farming families as a way to reform them and save society from future crime. Many of his writings contain prejudiced views about Irish and Italian immigrants, whose children made up a large portion of the homeless population. Asterisk, but despite these flawed motivations, Brace's idea would help save thousands of children's lives. In 1854, the first orphan train departed from New York City, carrying 46 children westward. It was the beginning of a movement that would continue for 75 years and relocate over 250,000 children. Asterisk. So how did this actually work? Let me walk you through what a typical orphan train journey looked like. And I have to warn you, some of this is pretty difficult to hear. Asterisk first. Agents from the Children's Aid Society and other charitable organizations would go out into the streets of New York, Boston, and other eastern cities to recruit children. Sometimes they'd take children directly from the streets. Other times, desperate parents would bring their children to the society, hoping for a better life for them. The children were promised they'd be placed with good families who would care for them, educate them, and treat them as their own. Asterisk, the children were cleaned up, given new clothes, and prepared for the journey. Then they were loaded onto trains, usually supervised by just one or two adults who were responsible for dozens of children. These weren't special trains, just regular passenger trains. Imagine being a regular traveler and suddenly finding yourself in a car full of frightened, confused children. Asterisk, the journey west could take days or even weeks. The trains would stop in predetermined towns where notices had been posted in advance. Homes wanted for children. When the train arrived, the children would be lined up, often on a stage or in the town square, and local families would come to look them over. Asterisk, this is where it gets really heartbreaking. The children were displayed like merchandise. Potential. Families would examine them, check their teeth like they were buying livestock, feel their muscles to see if they were strong enough for farm work. Sometimes they'd ask the children to sing or dance or demonstrate that they could read. Brothers and sisters were often separated, torn apart, and sent to different families, never to see each other again. Asterisk, if a family wanted a child, they'd sign some basic paperwork and that was it. The child would leave with these complete strangers who were now, effectively, their new parents. There were no background checks, no home visits, no follow-ups to make sure the child was being treated well. The Children's Aid Society tried to check on the children periodically through mail, but in reality, once a child was placed, they were on their own. Asterisk, now you might be thinking this sounds absolutely horrible, and in many ways it was. But the reality is more complicated than you might expect. Asterisk, some children truly did find loving homes. They were taken in by families who treated them as their own sons and daughters. They received education, grew up in stable environments, and went on to live successful lives. Some became doctors, lawyers, business people, and community leaders. There are documented cases of orphan train riders who later said the train was the best thing that ever happened to them, that it saved their lives. Asterisk, one famous success story is Andrew Burke, who arrived in Iowa on an N.